Hello, everybody, and welcome to another BALC Facebook event. My name is Jim Holcomb, and I'm the Executive Director for the Behavior Analyst Leadership Council. Now, some of you may be familiar with our organization, and some of you may not. We've been trying to be as active as possible during these weeks and months since the pandemic has occurred. We are a behavior analysis trade organization. We were founded in 2015, and we've actually held a number of conferences in the Northeast that have gotten pretty popular. We tried to go to Boston this past spring, but of course that didn't work out. But we are really hoping that we're going to be in Miami in 2022. We are committed to supporting behavior analysts, serving as leaders, managers, and business owners. We support them through a triad of excellence, support around the areas of effective leadership, clinical acumen, operational expertise. Our website is balcllc.org/events. We have a number of things happening right now, including an entire supervision series, so I urge you to go there and take a look. We are living in challenging times. Many behavior analysts in many states have qualified to be among the first to receive the COVID-19 vaccine because of the essential work you do for children and families. We want you to know that the BALC appreciates your efforts, and we are here to support you in any way that we can. You truly are among the heroes. Also important to note is that we are offering CEs for this event, and the speakers or moderator will be inserting participation words at a few points during the presentation. Participants will need to submit the participation words for verification of participation in order to acquire the CEUs. Now, to earn the CEUs, you need to watch the webinar, either live or recorded, note the participation words during the webinar, and then email us at info@balcllc.org. I'm going to pause here for a second so you can write that down. info@balcllc.org. You're going to need to include the subject line that says CEU request. That's how we know to respond very quickly to those things. So just make sure you put the subject line as CEU request, and you include the following in the body of the email: your name, your BACB number, the webinar title or meeting title, and the participation words. You'll then get an email back from us with further directions on how to collect the CEUs. Please note that the date of this email will be the date on the CEU certificate. And without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Courtney Cotter. She is the Director of Consultation at the Center for Children with Special Needs out of Waterbury, I believe. She can correct me if not. Received a PhD in clinical psychology from Western Michigan, and she is a licensed psychologist in BCBA. How you doing, Courtney?
Good. How are you this morning, Jim?
I am well. We are going to move on to our other co-author, Jessica Rohrer, and I had to ask her about her last name. It's like the lion. I thought that was a great way to do it. Jessica received her master's degree in applied behavior analysis through Northeastern University and is pursuing her doctorate in ABA through Endicott College. She's an adjunct professor at Endicott College and the University of St. Joseph's. She has publications in JABA and also in the Encyclopedia of Autism Spectrum Disorders. And how are you, Jess?
Hi, good. How are you?
Are you excited to do this?
I'm excited.
All right. Right now, I'm going to stop my share and allow our speakers to share their screen. And I will be breaking in for questions to relate to the speakers at a point. Jess, I think you shared your presenter screen because I can see the slide.
Just working on.
Probably want to try the screen share.
Getting that.
Or, I'm sorry, Courtney. I thought it was Jess. There you go.
That work? Okay, perfect. Great. Well, thank you for having us this morning, Jim. As Jim mentioned, Jessica and I work at the Center for Children with Special Needs, which is in Glastonbury, Connecticut. And I am the director of our consultation services. Jessica is our assistant director of consultation services. And we have done a lot of work with various school districts in Connecticut and also throughout the New England region since the time of widespread closures due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And so we wanted to take some time this morning just to talk a little bit about the things that we have learned about providing services to individuals with complex neurodevelopmental disabilities through remote learning platforms, and also in terms of navigating the return to schools as it became safe to reopen. So as we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic led to widespread school closures beginning in March 2020. And it's hard to imagine that was almost a year ago at this point. I remember hearing about schools potentially closing and thinking to myself, there's no way that schools are going to close. Schools will always stay open. And here we are a year later, still navigating some of the challenges related to school closure and supporting individuals with complex neurodevelopmental disabilities. Schools have continued to experience highly modified schedules, with schools being open for periods of time and then closed due to COVID exposures. We've been navigating school vacations, staffing challenges, I'm sure things that everybody across the country has also been navigating. And what we don't know at this point is what the scope of the resulting fallout from these closures is going to be. We're working hard as an organization to provide mitigation strategies to ensure that our students are continuing to receive consistent services. And that's a lot of what we want to talk about today. But we don't know necessarily how this pandemic is going to impact students, broadly speaking, and certainly students with neurodevelopmental challenges in the long run. And I think that's information that we'll be gathering over time through data collection processes, and then also just information from the students, teachers, and parents about the impact of the pandemic on these students. So just to give a little bit of background, the CCSN Consultation Division has been in place for a long time. It preceded me, it preceded Jessica. Our predecessor, Mark Palmieri, was the previous overseer of the Consultation Division. And we've provided consultation to school districts, other agencies supporting individuals with neurodevelopmental disorders. We've provided an international consultation in Italy and China, in Greece for a period of time, and London. And we work together with school teams to be able to increase capacity to support learners with complex neurodevelopmental disabilities. And so what that really looks like, the first thing that we do when we begin working with a school district is to execute a needs assessment. And so what we do is to go into the school district and do a series of observations and interviews with all of the relevant stakeholders, including district administration, parents, teachers, paraprofessional staff, and sometimes the students themselves, depending on how appropriate that is, to determine what the current state of affairs is in terms of providing services to individuals with complex neurodevelopmental needs, and what the desired state of affairs would be for providing services to those individuals. And from there, we work in collaboration with the school team to create a roadmap for moving from the current state of affairs within the public school setting to the desired state of affairs. Working in collaboration, our team with the public school team, to be able to keep these students in their public school settings so that they can continue to access typically developing peers while simultaneously accessing empirically supported best practice services for individuals with specific needs. Jess, do you want to talk about some of the other core features of our consultation process?
Yeah, I think that importantly, the multidisciplinary component is one of the most critical of the work that we do because of the number of professionals that are working within the school setting. We have input from general education teachers, case managers, as well as, you mentioned, related service providers, and then the families as important members of the child's team. And so coming together and kind of navigating all of the important work that they do and kind of streamlining that together so that we can move forward with effective programming for our learners is one of the most critical components. And I think that the collaboration that involves is extensive. It's daily, and it's, as you mentioned, weekly, multidisciplinary team meetings, and that requires time and effort on the part of all of the team members. And it also importantly involves input and buy-in from the district administration, and finding ways to incorporate the vision of the school districts and the needs of these learners in ways that, that is aligned with the work that we do.
And then just expanding a little bit more from there, we have, as Jess mentioned, our weekly multidisciplinary team meetings, in which that time is carved out for all members of the team to come together and coordinate and support each other in providing these services. Monthly parent meetings, which, as we talk further about how things shifted as we started providing support services to individuals in our school districts during the pandemic, those parent meetings shifted from monthly to weekly, and we'll talk about why that was so essential to the support work that we're providing to the school teams. Also importantly, just for context, the service providers that we provide consultation to is a core team, a teacher, related service professionals that provide services to a small cadre of students, usually about 8 to 10 students. And I think that's also important for context, because it provided a platform for us to be able to still continue to provide concentrated consultative services, even through remote learning platforms. Just quickly, some core features of our consultation is that we rely heavily on data-driven program development. So all of our students, as would be expected, have a program book, and we utilize those program books to make modifications to student programming based on their progress. And importantly, during the time of the pandemic, as we'll speak to, we shifted heavily from having more paper, pencil, or even using Excel in the classroom to track student progress to using Google Documents, so that we could be able to access student programming and their graphs and data indicating their progress from a distance, whether we were providing services at home or we were in school. And we'll speak to more detail about that as well. We consistently do treatment fidelity checks to ensure that we are implementing the services as they are documented in the students' program books. We do a lot of didactic and in vivo staff training, which also was a heavier focus during the time of the closure, specifically related to paraprofessional staff who at one point were at risk for being furloughed. And as we talked more about those challenges, we were concerned that when we returned to in-person schooling, if we furloughed the paraprofessional staff and they had to seek other positions, we would be in a situation where we didn't have staff to run the programs upon returning to school. And so in collaboration with district administration, we worked heavily to be able to identify ways to engage the paraprofessional staff. And often that incorporated more significant staff training, which then put us in a better position when we did return to in-person learning to be able to support the students within the programs. And also, as would be expected, we provide support to our school teams in completing behavior assessment and criterion referenced assessments, such as the AFLs and the VB map and the ABLs. So at the time of the school closures, we worked quickly and closely in collaboration with our district partners to establish models of service delivery so that we could ensure continuity of services for vulnerable learners. What we wanted to avoid was having students at home for a period of time without having structures in place where we could engage those students in learning. And we felt that that was important both for allowing continuity of services for the students, but also to establish a sense of predictability for the families in terms of understanding what would happen while their students were at home so that we could continue providing educational services. Immediately after the closures, one of the first things we did was to advocate for video platforms to be used for delivery of instruction for individuals with complex learning needs. And that was really essential because at the very onset of the closure, there was a lot of hesitancy around using video platforms to provide educational services. And thinking back to that time frame back in March and April of 2020, individuals who were providing these services felt very concerned about having their personal lives kind of portaled into families' homes. And then also the unknown of what happens when you portal into somebody's living room, and that's where you're providing educational services. And now you're seeing the student's home environment and their family interactions. And we had to navigate that in collaboration with attorneys from the district to be able to support teams in feeling more comfortable in providing services through video platforms. Sorry, I clicked ahead here. We also worked on doing asynchronous teaching as well, which involved providing videos of, sorry, I'm clicking through my slides here, having a little bit of a technical difficulty. We were just joking about the fact that we can't get through a single presentation without a technical difficulty. So let me just restart here, and then we'll get back to our conversation.
I think one of the important things, Courtney, about getting started with the process and the synchronous learning and incorporating families in this process was that balance that we had to strike between not overwhelming families with too many synchronous sessions right off the bat that they weren't able to handle. We had some families who expressed that they weren't ready for participating as their child's support staff, right, at the moment, that they needed a little bit of time to adjust to this new way of doing things. And so that's where some of those parent meetings that we started doing weekly came in as very important, because the families were able to bring forward their concerns, the struggles that they were experiencing in the home setting, and we could work with the school teams to find a balance, to continue the students' learning, to make sure that they're to mitigate regression as much as possible, and also make sure that they were now learning targets that were important to the family in the home setting during this time, which may importantly be different than we would have been doing in school.
Absolutely. I think that's an important point for us to reflect on, because it was also really important through the multidisciplinary teaming process for us to be able to ensure that we were organizing those services so as not to overwhelm the family and not to overlap. So both the parent meetings and the multidisciplinary team meetings became very important in that regard. At this point, I'm going to pause to give you your first participation word. The participation word is Michigan, M-I-C-H-I-G-A-N, Michigan. And we'll give one additional participation word at another point during the presentation. So we also, in addition to providing synchronous learning experiences, provided access to asynchronous learning experiences as well. And this was in part in response to parents indicating that they were trying to juggle working from home with providing support to their students who really needed significant support in terms of accessing online platforms to participate in educational experiences. And so we did some pre-recorded lessons that could be utilized to extend learning experiences delivered in synchronous format, or for families who struggled to access the synchronous lessons, could be used at a time that was more convenient for those families to provide learning experiences to their students. We also did weekly opportunities for the parents to meet with their educational team to partner together in delivery of instruction to the students. At the very beginning of the pandemic, we heavily focused on establishing an instructional space at home and instructional control for the families. Because one of the things that happens, as you can imagine, when students come to school, there's a clear expectation for participation in educational activities. At home, there is not that clear expectation. And in fact, it's quite the opposite, that at home, you may do some homework type assignments, but generally speaking, it's a space for relaxing, unwinding. Students may have in-home ABA services, but there's very specific instructional control that's established around the provider who's giving those services. And so quickly we had to work with parents to help explain what instructional control is and how parents could establish it with their students in the home setting. And that included things like setting up an instructional space with minimal distractions in a specific location in the house. We also used other discriminative stimuli, such as using a specific color card to indicate when that space was being used for teaching and when that space would be used for other activities if we couldn't create a space solely for academic activities. So we used a variety of different strategies, but heavily focused on that in the initial days of the pandemic to support us in eventually being able to fade parents back from such heavy engagement in the remote learning opportunities. Because truly, parents who were also trying to sustain their own jobs found it unsustainable to have to participate in synchronous learning opportunities to the extent that was required at the start of the pandemic. We, as Jess mentioned, continued focusing on multidisciplinary teaming, and this became, in my opinion, even more important than we experienced it to be when schools were in session and teams were together. Because when teams were not together and were working remotely from home, there wasn't the opportunity to coordinate in the ways that you might during a typical school day, being able to catch each other in the hallway or observe someone else's session easily by just popping into the classroom. And so we focused on multidisciplinary teaming to be sure that we were staying coordinated and consistent in our approach to working with students. And also that we were being cautious, as Jess mentioned, not to overwhelm families, and also to work to schedule sessions that were at an appropriate time for the family and that coordinated among the service providers on the team. We also continue to use this platform to update on student progress, barriers to learning, progress toward establishing instructional control in the home, skills that were being, lost or regressed in the time period of the initial part of the pandemic, and progress we were making toward regaining those skills, and then problem solving together as a multidisciplinary team, supporting each other in trying to navigate this newfound way of providing educational services to students with this level of complexity. The support and structure of instruction also was an important area of consultation for our teachers at the start of the pandemic. And specifically, many of our consultation team members have experience providing distance consultation, as I mentioned, to individuals in Italy and in China. And so while this was a different moment, we weren't strangers to being able to provide consultative services to individuals that we had not had the opportunity to tangibly and organically be with on a regular basis. And so that experience proved to be very important in terms of helping our teachers to think about what types of instruction to provide, certainly at the outset of the pandemic, but then across the pandemic time period. Ways to get students to be engaged across the screen, ways to coach parents and to coordinate with home service providers who are also providing remote learning opportunities. And so that expertise that we were able to bring forward was crucial in terms of helping families and teachers to experience success with providing distance learning opportunities, particularly at the outset of the pandemic.
I think we were all learning along with each other. Courtney, as you mentioned, we had some expertise in the coaching and, video modeling and walking folks through how to present instruction via this remote platform. But we also were learning along with everyone else, introducing how to best incorporate things like boom cards and Pear Deck and all of the different learning platforms that were kind of popping up in those early days of the pandemic. I mean, I think everyone had the experience of someone reaching out to them or reaching out to someone else to ask, how can I access this learning, or how can I present this learning in a way that's accessible to my students? They're on a Chromebook and I'm on an iPad, or how do I navigate this? And so I think being creative and also kind of relying on those core aspects of telehealth and virtual instruction was really critical. We can still rely back on video modeling and virtual coaching and things that we know how to do. It just looked a little bit different now and may have included some different components, such as families in their homes.
Absolutely. And this next slide that actually leads us really nicely into this next slide about the various supports that were provided to special educators across the time of providing remote learning experiences. One of the first things we did was to help support teachers in identifying appropriate targets for distance learning. So when these IEPs were written in the 2019 school year, for the 2018-19 school year, for the 2019-2020 school year, we had no idea that we were going to be moving to remote learning platforms. And there were some targets that were identified in the program books and maybe not specifically specified on the IEP that were very appropriate for the school setting, but were very difficult to achieve teaching around in the home-based setting. Things like small group instruction with peers, being able to, pause and raise your hand and wait to be recognized, some of those types of social skills type experiences. And so we had to work in collaboration with our teachers and our families to ensure full transparency around the targets that we were going to continue to be able to access and target during home-based instruction, and those that would have to be put on hold until we could return to school-based learning. And now, a year into the pandemic, we have the opportunity to provide the IEP implementation plans to families and have those as a written document that we can use with families to review where there are shifts and changes to IEP implementation. But at the start of the pandemic, these were organic and important conversations that we were having with families about things that we had anticipated being able to target that we're going to need to shift or pivot. Those conversations also led to really important feedback from families on where they were struggling. And so in addition to working on IEP goals and objectives, families helped us to understand what types of specific targets they would like us to work on during remote learning. And in some cases, it was things related to being able to be respectful of a sibling when the sibling was engaged in their own remote instruction, or engagement in play with siblings, or independent completion of work tasks so that families could have the opportunity to do their own work while students were engaged in remote learning. And so I think one of the silver linings of the pandemic, which I do try to look for those often, is that the coordination that we were able to achieve with families was so much richer and so much more collaborative and coordinated, because truly we were working in concert with families to continue to provide these educational opportunities to students.
I think one thing that also came out, Courtney, was just that families were bringing forward skills that were important to their learners that they wanted us to help them work on that we wouldn't ordinarily have been doing, and their real skills and their life skills and their adaptive skills. And one that comes to mind is I had a learner who was working on ordering food in the cafeteria, and we pivoted and shifted that to learning how to order food online. And he was able to he had a lot of skills already, prerequisite skills, but he was able to navigate the internet to learn a really important skill of, being able to order food for himself, as just an example. And that's something that a parent brought forward as something that would be important to them that they never would have thought of previously.
Absolutely. And those were exciting moments too, in terms of thinking about other skills that we could target with our students that may increase long-term their participation in the community in a more independent way. Of course, as we shifted targets, we had to make some modifications to existing lesson plans and development of the lesson plans that were included in student program books. So we worked in collaboration with our teachers to do that, and also with our parents to do that, so that we could implement lesson plans through remote learning platforms in collaboration with families. Our development of data collection systems moved to as I was saying, Google Documents, and we also moved from using a lot of trial by trial data collection strategies to probe data collection strategies. Because when we needed the parents to support in doing data collection, probe-based data collection was much more sustainable. And also for our teachers, in terms of manipulating and monitoring all of the various pieces of technology, in addition to maintaining student engagement in the learning opportunity, probe-based data collection became much more sustainable for our teachers. And so we moved to that whenever appropriate so that things could continue to move along while getting data that were needed to be able to track student progress. We worked with paraprofessionals on implementation of distance programming. Within Connecticut, the districts really varied in terms of what paraprofessional involvement looked like. Some districts wanted paraprofessionals only engaged when certified staff, such as the special education teacher, were also on the Zoom call. Other districts were comfortable with paraprofessionals implementing instruction independently as guided by the special education teacher. And so we just worked with our districts, depending on what their comfort level was, to execute training with paraprofessionals on implementation of the distance programming to support the special education teacher in working with the students through remote learning platforms. And then we supported parent education on implementation of in-home programming and behavior supports. So we did do a lot of work with families to be able to support them in learning about their students' BSP, behavior support plan, and implementation of that behavior support plan in the home setting, modifying it as needed, but to support the student in being able to access remote learning opportunities and be more successful with accessing those and addressing challenging behavior while they were engaged in learning opportunities. As mentioned, we increased the frequency of our parent meetings from monthly to weekly to make sure that we were touching base with families on a regular basis and ensuring that they were feeling supported throughout the course of the remote learning experience. Parents, we gave them the opportunity to participate weekly. We did not require weekly participation. So if the feedback was that that was too often for them in terms of meetings, we would just meet the parents where they were at and adjust the schedule of parent meetings so that it was supportive to them. But we did offer them on a weekly basis. Also, as mentioned, we did a lot of professional development for non-certified staff. And this was brought about because we are very invested in doing professional development for non-certified staff, but also because when it started to be discussed about having paraprofessionals furloughed, as I mentioned, we were concerned about the sustainability of the program upon return. And our parent communities also really reacted very strongly to paraprofessionals potentially being furloughed. And so district administration reached out and we developed ways to do paraprofessional training by doing recorded didactic trainings that were then followed up with synchronous discussion-based formats. And we really used the opportunity to do professional development, which truly has been very supportive in the long run, having paraprofessionals back in schools, having a much stronger foundation on some of the principles and practices of behavior analysis, deeper understanding of the function of problem behavior, are things that truly have paid dividends in terms of providing greater supports for our students now that we are returned to in-school learning. And then we continue to have administrative involvement. We met with the district administrators on a regular basis to update on student progress, any systemic challenges that were being experienced. And this also became a forum for special education directors to ensure that they were calibrated with other districts within the state. So since we were all navigating this for the first time, a lot of times we would be able to have conversations among the directors to ensure that there was consistency in how services were being implemented in various districts across the state of Connecticut. And that proved to be very helpful as well for directors to feel that they were being supported by each other in neighboring districts. Jess, do you want to chat a little bit about some of the challenges that were experienced?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I think as we all know, there were a lot of challenges experienced. This was new to everyone, and as we mentioned, the challenges that families were facing with regard to the dynamic of now navigating, working from home or trying to go to work and childcare, and also now sort of educating their children in the home setting and being supported by the school teams, but being supported remotely feels different than being supported in person. So as expected, there were a number of challenges experienced. For example, there were many moments when students were not able to be present for sessions for a variety of reasons. And as Courtney spoke to, the role of the paraprofessionals proved to be incredibly important to facilitate learning for these students. So there were sometimes moments where we were able to have a paraprofessional who was kind of logged on to the session throughout the day, who could then help this child navigate if the family was able to get the child to log into sessions. If it was a child who was able to respond to verbal cues or gestural cues from the paraprofessional, to point them in the right direction. Here's what you click on, here's what you do next, go get your mom. Whatever the cues that they needed to give were, we were able to have a support staff available to walk them through that in many cases. We were also able to teach students to use in-home reminders and other cues to set, a timer on their microwave, or to use Alexa, things that are, unique to the home setting that we hadn't necessarily used as supports before, were all potential solutions to the barriers that were experienced. Sometimes if there were moments where students were consistently missing sessions and, we were concerned about their educational opportunities and missing too many of those, then the schools would send certified letters to the family when we did exhaust all other options, and all other options included, multiple times reaching out to the families, calling, emailing, texting, trying to access the family any way that we could to make sure that they were well supported, right? Importantly, these were not calls or emails that were, critical or probing, I think, in any way. Instead, they were just ways to reach out to the families to provide support, to let them know that the school was offering sessions during these times, or providing asynchronous learning opportunities, and we wanted to make sure that the students were able to access them as well as possible. In addition, we encountered language barriers. When the students come to school and they're in person, it's just the student on their own by themselves, and we can navigate any language barriers in the school setting. But when we are sort of portaling into the home setting, we encounter very different family dynamics. We may have extended family in the home. We may have parents who, speak a different language other than English as their first language. And so for those challenges, we were able to reach out to either a district translator or a foreign language teacher to support with translation during those sessions, to make sure that the family was having a good understanding of what the school team was offering and supporting with. We were also able to use those individuals to support with translating instructional materials. So if things were being sent home that the family was not able to access, then we were able to support with translating those. And those could be things from, educational materials to instructions for logging onto a session. We had to be very creative with how we were supporting families with learning how to do all of this. So I think that, there were a number of challenges experienced, and we didn't always have immediate and effective solutions, but we certainly worked alongside the school teams to reach out to any resources that we had available to solve those problems. One of the largest challenges that we experienced was the confidentiality in small group teaching. And as Courtney mentioned, when we first started, video or live instruction during the pandemic, there were concerns all around. There were concerns from the perspective of school teams, and there were also concerns from the perspective of the families with regard to who was, seeing their learner. If we had a cohort of identified learners doing, for example, a virtual social skills group with a social worker, there could be concerns regarding who was watching that session. And whether it was potentially being recorded, or whether someone was seeing something that they weren't able to see. And so we worked with our districts on an opt-out agreement that was developed in collaboration with their attorneys to make sure that folks had the opportunity to opt out of participating in these sessions, or kind of adjusting them to make sure that everyone felt comfortable with joining groups. Or not joining groups if that was something that they weren't comfortable with. And then sometimes we had situations where parents or other family members in the home were not available to support with instruction. They may have been working, they may have been caring for other children. There are a number of barriers to supporting your child with in-home learning, especially if it was something that was sort of thrust upon you and you didn't expect to have to do it. And so we supported those as much as we possibly could. Paraprofessionals were absolutely critical in this support to, be online and walk the child through. And sometimes we had paraprofessionals or typically special education teachers who might have been in touch with the parents through text, who were upstairs or in the next room, not sitting next to their child, but we could let them know, so-and-so is taking a break. And so, he'll be free for 5 minutes. And if you could just send him back. And if not, then we worked around that. We found ways to help the children themselves learn to set timers or set reminders, or call them back, or make things enticing from a virtual perspective, set up videos and set up those sorts of things to help them kind of navigate that independently. And then ongoing parent meetings, as Courtney mentioned, were so critical to allow that collaborative problem solving. We could not have done it without having regular parent contact where families were able to bring forward their concerns and the barriers that they were experiencing. We had families come forward and, let us know that it just wasn't possible for them to, log on this many times, but what they would do is log on, a third of those times and supplement that with pre-recorded or asynchronous material that the special educator was able to send home. And we worked with them on what that looked like and how to navigate that. And then also worked with the special educator on how to capture that with regard to data collection.
Oh, sorry, it's not advancing. Hold on. Oh, there we go.
It's okay. We have plenty of challenges. I think that the instructional control, as you spoke to earlier, Courtney, was one of the primary barriers when we first started doing this work. We had families who were essentially saying to us, my kid doesn't work at home. That's not what they do. They work at school and then they come home and they do their thing at here, which is resting and relaxing, and we're not able to work. And so the coaching that we provided and that we provided alongside the school teams was provided to match that family dynamic. We never, we pushed the families only so much as we needed to make sure that the student was accessing what they needed to access while still maintaining supports within the comfort level of that family. And so we found that instructional spaces were hugely impactful in helping families understand if you don't have a separate space, here is a way that you can, create a space that feels split for the child so that they understand that this is what I do in this thing and this is what I do outside of it. Interfering behavior was, of course, another challenge that families experienced. Some families were familiar with these challenges and, their children had been engaging in challenging behaviors in the home setting already. And it was something that they were accustomed to, but some this was really new for, especially because they weren't accustomed to presenting the level of instructional demands as they were now being asked to. And so we navigated that alongside with the families. There was certainly not one way that we approached this. It was completely tailored to the family's needs. And we modified the behavioral strategies as needed after reviewing the behavior support plan with the family. Typically, one of the things that we focused on were things like antecedent interventions, strategies to help the families set things up so that the child could be successful without then having to rely on sort of the management strategies piece of the behavior support plan. Many families were not accustomed to presenting this level of demands in the home setting. And so we worked with them on ways to embed instruction and ways to set it up so that their child was successful, potentially for small pockets of the day, even smaller pockets than we would have been doing in school. But that was okay because it was a way to sort of shape that instruction and work up to a level that everyone was comfortable with and that was still ensuring student progress.
And then finally, when we finally got to ESY, we were able to return to some live instruction. Some of our districts did continue to be remote only throughout the summer and needed that time to be able to prepare for returning to live instruction in the fall. But many of our districts provided some portion of services in person, on site in the schools. In the summer, we had some districts providing live related services and having the teachers portal in through remote learning platforms to provide the academic services. In those instances, we had BCBAs from CCSN on site with the related service providers. And the students would continue to stay at the school, and we would support the students in accessing their academic instruction while the teacher provided it from a remote location. In other districts, they went full live instruction with academic instruction and related services being provided on site, and then supplementing that with remote teaching, typically on Wednesdays to allow for deep cleaning of the building. So having students on site Monday, Tuesday, remote learning Wednesday, and then on site Thursday, Friday. And those were generally very successful models. We had a lot of really positive feedback from parents. We also took the opportunity to do some live in-person parent training to be able to work on specific skills like establishing instructional control or being able to respond to name without a physical prompt or sustaining attention to electronic devices. We did some parent training on those specific types of skills and how to work with a student on those skills, so that in the event that students went back to remote learning, parents had some tools in their tool belt that they could use to try to help work on those skills with their students at home. And then this school year, some of our school teams returned. Actually, I should say all of our school teams returned learners that we were providing consult to full-time on-site learning. For some districts, that was Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and that was what full-time was considered because Wednesday was used for deep cleaning. And then some of our districts had students on-site Monday through Friday. The general education students were not on site full-time in all of our districts, but the special education students and certainly the students with complex neurodevelopmental disabilities did return full-time. Some of our students had cohorted access to general education, which meant that they were assigned to either cohort A or cohort B and could access general education during the time that their cohort was on site. So if their cohort was on site Monday, Tuesday, they would be able to access general education on those days, and then we're fully in the special education classroom on the other days of the week. Some of our districts did cohort A in the morning and cohort B in the afternoon. And so for our students who had cohorted access to general education, they would be able to go to general education in the morning and then be in the special education classroom in the afternoon. So in the context of that organization, we worked with our special education teachers to identify how we wanted to best use the time that students were in the special education classroom for extended periods. Importantly, our consultative model really considers the team of individuals, the team of professionals providing those services to be a team of professionals who are implementing an IEP in every location within the school building. So our students are not often in the special education classroom for extended periods of time unless their specific needs really make it difficult for them to participate in general education. And even in those instances, we are then working on why is it difficult to participate in general education and what do we need to do to get the students into general education and accessing their IEP goals and objectives in that setting more frequently. And so it really was a shift in mindset for our teachers to have the students in the special education room for extended periods of time. And we worked with them to identify ways to do small group instruction while still using all of the mitigation strategies and keeping students safe in the context of COVID-19.
Courtney, now is a good time to I just want to make sure that we follow the prompt to give the second code word. The participation word, which is California, CALIFORNIA, California.
Thank you, Jessica.
Yeah, didn't want to forget that.
Yep, exactly. That's important. Some of our students had full-time on-site and full access to general education. So they were able to be in the general education settings, regardless of whether it was cohort A or cohort B on site. And so for those students, we didn't have to plan as actively around extended periods of time in the special education setting. And then some of our students had full-time on-site and remote access to general education, which then was a challenge in and of itself, because many of our higher functioning students were saying, we're in school and my friends are in school, So I don't want to do remote learning while I'm in school. And I think that that makes really good sense. I'm also not wanting to do Zoom meetings if I don't have to. And so working through that with our students, helping them to understand why that was important in terms of maintaining safety, was something that we had to work really closely with our students on. And I think that that was one specific challenge that was experienced by some of our students, and the associated anxiety and overt behavior challenges related to that did prove to be a challenge upon returning to school in the fall. Oh, hang on, it's not advancing. There we go. We also did make some pretty substantial revisions to our program books upon returning to school to move the program book structures to Google Documents in full. And so the lesson plans were yoked to hyperlinks that could be clicked on in the context of a data sheet, so that the lesson plan would open up and the data sheet would open up, so that whether we were at school or at home, we could easily access those documents to allow consistency of implementation of programming in whatever setting we were in. And that proved to be important as quarantine picked up in the later fall and early winter. Sometimes our students were quarantined, but we were able to continue with consistency of implementation because we could access those program books no matter where we were, and students could access the educational materials no matter where they were. Similarly, when staff were quarantined, we could continue teaching from home, even if our students were on site, but we were not. And then we also had some unique circumstances in which both students and staff were on site, but we required distancing in order to be able to provide the specific teaching needed in a way that was safe. So we could have a teacher in a separate space from the student and paraprofessional staff. The teacher could remove their mask to be able to provide modeling about how to say a specific word or to do decoding when teaching phonics. And the student with their paraprofessional could still have their masks on, but safely be able to see the teacher through a remote learning platform. And in that regard, having all of the documents in Google Documents also was very important and helpful to us. So Jessica's going to talk through a little bit about how we set up our program books through Google Documents. I know that this is small, but it's just for general reference. So Jess can talk us through this a little bit.
Sure. So as Courtney mentioned previously, our programs were all set up with paper program books. And so the program books were typically divided up by IEP objective. And so the paraprofessional or the teacher, whoever was working with the learner, would be able to flip to a specific objective, say 1.1. And, when we had paper books, in the paper book would be able to flip to that tab and find a lesson plan that outlined the direct instruction sequence of steps, the prompt hierarchy, all of the necessary information that the support staff would need to run that program, as well as the materials that were needed for that program were provided in there, and the data sheet and graph, as well as some supplemental materials that we use, such as a target set list and a program change log. Those were all located in the paper program book. And so in order to accommodate the unique challenges that we experienced when the schools closed, we did move to electronic formats. And that allowed us to still include all of the important components of the paper program book, but in an electronic format, so that when the different dynamics of staff on site, student at home, or student on site, staff at home came up, we didn't have to navigate, where are the data sheets and who has the most contemporary information. It was all located on this electronic platform, which, as Courtney mentioned, in this case was a Google Doc or a Google platform, but could probably be done in other ways as well. So this is just an example of something we would have, sort of a program checklist with each of the students' objectives. So say 1.1 was sight words, for example. That would be on a checklist that the staff would then just be able to click on. And when they clicked on 1.1, that would bring them to this folder. Okay, so this folder has within it, as you can sort of see, a lesson plan that would then outline how to implement that program, what to show the student, how many words to show the student, what the student response should be, what the teacher response should be, error correction procedures, all of those elements of the instruction, as well as a data sheet. Now, in some cases, the data sheets were used in an electronic format where the support staff would, for example, highlight yes or no, did the student get it correct, directly on this data sheet. As we return to school, some school teams elected to return to some paper-based formats while still utilizing the electronic program book components such as the graphing and the lesson plans. So support staff on site could have a printed out data sheet where they were collecting data on paper and then immediately input it to this electric format. So there were a number of flexible sort of iterations of this electronic program book and incorporating elements of paper and pencil data collection and programming with the electronic programming. But the important consideration is that there is a place electronically where this information lives so that the case manager, as well as the support staff, as well as, consulting BCBAs, in some cases related service staff, could all access this information and have a good understanding of where the where the student was at with regard to their progress, and be able to make notes and have data collection at their fingertips without having to worry about where the actual physical book was.
And I think importantly, we were able to do this in the context of existing technology within the district. So districts didn't have to invest in purchasing specific technology to be able to track this type of data collection, though those types of platforms are out there and do exist. We were able to do this within existing technology, as we mentioned, within Google Docs. And in that regard, it was helpful for our teams to be able to see that this is a really fluid way to continue continuity of services regardless of where our students are. And I think it is probably one of the things that long-term will be a change that continues to exist within the program, because it does allow us greater fluency and greater continuity, whether we're in general education, special education settings, and in the current context at home, engaging in remote learning platforms. Generally, when we returned to school, we found that the COVID-19 safety precautions were well tolerated. So most of our students came to school and were able to tolerate wearing masks. With many of our students, we had already targeted hand washing protocols as part of just general hygiene strategies. So those were quite well tolerated, even with the increased number of times that we were having students do hand washing. We did have a small subset of students who were not able to tolerate wearing a mask. And for those students, we developed desensitization protocols to be able to help increase their ability to wear masks and tolerate having those on their faces. Importantly, those desensitization protocols moved fairly slowly, starting with tolerating just holding the mask up to face and putting it down 1 second, 2 seconds, and then gradually up to 10 seconds. We did probe ahead in the desensitization strategies to see if once students hit some critical point of a number of seconds that they could wear the mask, that they were able to jump forward to minutes and then gradually keeping the mask on for the duration of the school day. We did have good success with the desensitization protocols, but I will say that they moved slowly. And that was important in terms of normalizing that for the school teams, because desensitization protocols, shaping protocols generally do move fairly slowly. For teachers, we did advocate for increased PPE, access to additional rooms and spaces so that we could provide additional social distancing for the students who were not able to keep masks on. And generally speaking, district administration were very supportive of those strategies and did whatever they could to help teachers continue to feel safe, even when we had students who were not able to tolerate mask wearing for long periods of time.
In addition to desensitization, we also, as you mentioned, worked to see what sorts of accommodations we could incorporate into the students' program. So if they weren't able to wear a mask, we did try things like face shields. In some cases, some pretty fancy looking helmets that were able to be tolerated a little bit better than a mask, or even just increased distancing with introduction of things like plexiglass, in addition to the increased PPE on the part of the support staff. So I think, for those learners that, weren't able to make good progress with the desensitization protocols or required additional accommodations, we were able to make those as well. In many cases, not all the time.
Absolutely. And some of the increased PPE that we're referring to was wearing more than one mask or wearing a KN95 mask instead of a cloth mask. Our teachers also had access to gloves and those, I don't know what they're called, but those yellow disposable gowns that folks can wear in medical settings that can be discarded at the end of the day. So those were some of the additional PPE measures that were taken for our teachers working with students who struggled to wear masks for consistently across the day. In general, we focused intentionally on distance collaboration, and when our students returned to school, many of our students we felt had less skill regression than we anticipated that they would. So many of our students were still able to make progress on their goals and objectives, and when we baselined students upon return to school, we did see progress on goals and objectives, acquisition of new skills. We also did see that skills that were maintained, that were acquired prior to the onset of school closures were maintained post-school closure. It seemed that students who struggled with prerequisite skills for accessing remote instruction demonstrated the greatest amount of regression. And those were students that upon returning to school, when we baselined, indeed their skills had dropped significantly and that we had difficulty recouping those skills. It took a significant period of time to reteach those skills upon returning to school. And those students were students who were not consistently responding to their name, students who had difficulty sustaining attention to instruction in the absence of adult prompting. So many of our students have access to oftentimes one-to-one paraprofessional staffing, sometimes shared paraprofessional staffing, but generally speaking, a rich amount of adult support in the classroom. And that provides the ability to redirect a student either through verbal or physical prompting in the classroom. And so for students who were still very reliant on that in order to sustain attention, they really struggled to sustain attention to remote learning technology because there wasn't always someone there to provide the verbal or physical redirection back to task. And then our students who had a lack of vocal and verbal communication responses, so didn't have a reliable way to communicate vocally or verbally through alternative and augmentative communication devices, were students who were differentially more impacted by regression upon returning to school. And so we find that to be important information because in terms of advocacy around having students on site, even when general education students were not on site full-time, we spoke to these specific skill sets and the differential impact that these students experienced related to regression. And that was an important point of advocacy in terms of having students return full-time so that we could support them more holistically and more organically and using teaching strategies that were effective for those students. We also, as we always have had, are even more concentrated in reducing prompting to return to task and are very sensitive to prompt dependency because we want to make sure that if we do have to return to remote instruction, that we are focusing heavily on these skills so that our students can be as successful as possible should they have to return to remote instruction. This is just a sample graph of one of our students that demonstrates some of the regression that we did see when students returned to instruction. So as you can see in February of 2020, the student had just recently demonstrated mastery, what we would consider mastery of receptive identification of their name, as evidenced by those 3 data points at 100% just prior to the closure. When that skill was re-baselined at the start of extended school year in July, the student had markedly lost that skill. And toward the end of ESY had demonstrated that he was starting to recoup the skill. Importantly though, at the end of ESY, when the student returned back to school in September, we again saw that that skill had regressed. And it took us, as you can see, roughly 6 weeks to recoup that skill. So this is one of our students who has difficulty communicating using vocal or verbal responses, sustaining attention to task, and responding to their name. And so this graph is important to me because it demonstrates that there was skill regression here. And it also demonstrates the amount of time that it took to recoup that skill. And I frequently talk with school teams and parents feeling concerned that our students don't have time to lose skills and have to relearn them, because there are so many skills that we are trying to help support our students in developing before they hit 21 and are, going into adult services. And so while it is a positive thing that the student did recoup the skill, it does bring me concern about the impact that remote learning has on students with these specific level of impact, and the amount of time it takes us to recoup skills upon return to in-person learning. So that leads us to some of the recommendations that we brought forward to the districts that we supported during the consultation period during the COVID-19 pandemic closures. Specifically, that we recommended and advocated for participation in full-time instruction even during hybrid models, so that our students could participate in on-site learning to the greatest extent possible, even when their general education peers were still experiencing hybrid learning. We also worked on developing essential skills for remote learning while on site. And these skills were things like, as I was speaking to, responding to your name, being able to increase the amount of sustained attention time without requiring adult redirection. And of course, we always work on development of communication skills, but being able to continue to work on communication skills for the students that we were supporting once they were able to return to on-site learning. Jess, are you able to speak to some of the work that we did with regard to those skills in terms of how we went about teaching some of those things?
Sure. And I also want to highlight that one of the other things that we worked on while we were in person, but still working on remote learning skills, were things like independently accessing the learning platform. So a lot of students were able to learn sort of a task analyzed version of how to turn on and open your computer, and how, what to click on to log into your Google Meets with your teacher, how to mute and unmute yourself, and how to type in the chat box. And all of those skills that we all learned or had to learn early on in the pandemic, how to navigate Zoom and switch screens and minimize, and all of those things were really important skills for our learners to have. But we also, in some cases, weren't able to teach those until we had them back on site. And so once we did have that, we were able to work on some of those skills in preparation for either future closures or quarantines, as sort of on classroom by classroom bases. And so I think that our students certainly learned a number of new skills along with us, and those were important to teach in person, since sometimes we couldn't do that remotely. And I think that with regard to teaching the essential skills, such as attending to the screen, without parents present, we taught those in largely the same ways as we would any other skill, in terms of, prompt fading and setting expectations and using visuals. So for some learners, we were able to, have visual timers available that were separate from their screen, or included in their screen, so that they were able to see how long they sort of needed to stay on and stay focused. And so those were some of the things that we looked at while we were on site with our learners, in terms of skills that they would need to have later on.
We also worked a lot on increasing parent training. During summer, when there were fewer students on site, really it was the majority of students on site were our special education students who were having significant challenges related to neurodevelopmental issues. But there were a few other special education students on site as well. But during the summer, when we had fewer students there, we were able to have parents on site to do some parent training in vivo with parents. During the school year, we moved to doing remote platform-based parent training. And what we would do is to have the teacher and BCBA work with the student privately in a separate space and bring the parent into that session using remote learning platforms so that they could observe the teacher and BCBA working directly with the student. The teacher generally would work with the student while the BCBA narrated what was going on, or vice versa, to help parents see how we would be implementing various types of programs, so that again, in the event that our students had to return to remote learning, parents felt more informed and involved in their students' educational process. I do want to get some social validity data from families on that, because much of the research on stress related to having a family member with ASD speaks to the fact that sometimes individuals feel that they are not competent or not informed in how to best support their family member with specific needs. And I would love to get some social validity data from families on whether the parent training that was received in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic was impactful to them in terms of their feelings of confidence and how to work with their family member with specific needs, and whether that in turn impacted stress that they experienced related to supporting the individual with ASD during the pandemic. We did document strategies that were effective for various students during the initial closure. So what we did was to write down how we got students engaged in remote learning, what their individual space looked like at home, so that if we had to go about recreating the space at home or ways to engage the student, that we weren't recreating the wheel, that we had those things written down. We could easily refer back to what were effective strategies for the student at the start of the closure, so that we could recreate those supports immediately upon the closure. We also spoke a lot with district administration about social distancing considerations. Importantly, the students that we provide support to often require us to be fairly close to them to manipulate materials when needed, to provide prompting. And so we did speak a lot with district administration about whether we could gain access to additional PPE, as I was describing, because maintaining a social distance of 6 feet with students with this level of need is very challenging. And so we did support our teachers in doing so whenever possible. And then the district administrations that we worked with were very supportive in gaining access to additional PPE, plexiglass that could be between the teacher and student, whenever possible. We did also continue to work on desensitization to the use of PPE for the students that we were providing support to upon their return to school. We started working on that with families, implementing desensitization protocols before students came to school to try to ensure that we were as well prepared as possible, and then continued working on that after students returned as well. We also spoke often with district administration about carefully considering the demands on teachers who are now asked to support students both on site and virtually. So we have some teachers who have a caseload of students that some of those students have returned to school and are receiving live and in-person instruction, but that a subset of their students are also still gaining access to education remotely. And so now you have teachers who are teaching students in person and teaching students remotely, in addition to being sort of the front line in terms of doing a visual inspection of students to make sure that they don't appear ill, reminding students to bring their masks up over their nose, helping to support students in having the appropriate PPE and having that PPE on, helping students replace their masks if those masks become wet or soiled in any way. And so truly, if I can just take a moment, teachers really are one of the superheroes of this pandemic. They have learned in a heartbeat how to provide instruction using new platforms. They have learned in a heartbeat how to engage students in ways that are completely different than are generally taught in teacher education around, exploration of materials and student-driven learning and small group instruction. And they have done it all while still maintaining generally a happy, safe place for students to be. So a big shout out to our teachers who are the superheroes for these students during the pandemic. And we did work with district administration to try to help to illustrate the various stressors that teachers were experiencing and to keep caseloads small, specifically because teachers were experiencing all of those additional stressors and also now teaching in person and remotely at the same time. And then finally, as we already spoke to, we moved our program books to electronic platforms to support continuity of services across environments. And that continues to be an important aspect to our programs and something that we will likely maintain long-term. So thank you for the opportunity to participate in this presentation today. Please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions. The contact information for CCSN is listed there. And truly, Jim, thank you. It was an honor to be present here today with BALC.
And that was great. You guys did a great job, and as usual, some excellent work by CCSN. So we were really happy to have you guys here. So we didn't have very many questions, but that's okay. And we may get more questions. As I said, we're going to have the recording available for everybody and for CEUs for a while. We are also planning on doing a follow-up panel discussion. We're hoping to do that on March 4th. We're going to verify that date and then get back to everybody. Jess, do you have anything else that you want to say?
I just wanted to say that on my screen, at least, it looks like some of the contact information is cut off. So I just wondered if we could put that information for CCSN in like a chat or somewhere else that folks could access it if they want to. I don't know if it looks like that for you too, Jim.
Yeah, it is a little bit cut off. Let me just pause for a minute since we're recording to see if Courtney can get it back up onto a smaller screen.
Okay.
Those of you who are watching, and if you're rushed, it's okay to go off now because you've met the criteria for 1.5 CEUs for everybody. I'm going to share my screen while Courtney is trying to get that information up, and just remind everybody that to watch or to get the CEUs, you need to have watched the webinar, either live or recorded. Know the participation words that were provided, then info@ballc.org with the subject line CEU request. Then you need to include I'm looking off the screen because I'm using two monitors, but your name, your BACB number, the webinar title, and your participation words. And then we'll send an email back telling you about how to get the CEUs. There will be a fee for those of you, just so you know, if you watch the recorded version, for processing the CEUs. And the date of the CEUs will be the date of the email that is sent. Courtney, are we ready?
Yep, I put it in the chat, and I'm also going to reshare my screen that I made it, I think, a bit smaller, hopefully. Oh, now I closed it. Hold on. Let me open it back up.
Oh, we just love this online world instead of standing in front of people and having a discussion.
It's something.
Everybody hold on for the CCSN information. Yeah. We need a drum roll.
Exactly. Opening now. Okay, here it is at the bottom. Let me see if this will work better. Does that work a bit better?
There you go.
Okay, perfect. So don't hesitate to reach out with any questions. You can send it to the attention of Jessica or me, and we're happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, I will take back the share.
Okay.
Actually, if you could stop just for 1 second.
Yep.
There we go. And we share screen. Okay, on behalf of our presenters and the BALC, I want to thank everybody for attending, and remember, stay safe and be well out there.